Jiri Prochazka's remarkable comeback at UFC 320 was quite heroic, once again proving him to be one of the special MMA fighters. He was off his game, slipping and sliding around to the point everyone was wondering what was wrong with him. His performance in the first 2 rounds of this October 4th, 2025 fight against Khalil Rountree Jr. was among the most forgettable of his UFC career. A fight he should have won on paper turned into a fight he had no business winning, as he went from a -210 pre-fight favorite to a +500 underdog at the start of the 3rd round. One of the things that makes Jiri great is his abject refusal to go the distance. 36 of his 38 fights haven't required the judges, with his 1 decision win over Mark Tanios in the first round of the 2016 Rizin Openweight Grand Prix being a 2-round fight. What he did tonight was special, but it wasn't out of character. He's a fighter who is willing to go down on his sword, that was once again able to do what it took to win, only tonight it was even more magnificent. Fans will remember this fight for his amazing 3rd round revival, not for what came before it, and that's as it should be. The 3rd round will probably be round of the year. It's the stuff legends are made of. All those corny lines like wading into battle, plunging into the fire, 2 men enter, 1 man leaves, were created for this sort of war. This wasn't a fluke. Prochazka certainly could have been the one who got knocked out, but he's a whirlwind who knows he has more ways to deal with the storm than his opponent does. He's not the best technical fighter, and doesn't have much interest in going to the ground, but he comes at his opponent with many different angles, feints, and attacks that stretch well beyond the conventional, and the more he can speed things up, the less time they have to react to what's coming. He has amazing heart, determination, and belief, which gives him a much better chance of overcoming adversity like he did here, especially since dropping around isn't the end of the world when you're really just fighting to finish. When all else fails, as it mostly did here, he can rely on his power and his chin. If he can stun his opponent, he can often cascade that damage into a finish. Rountree is one of the most intimidating opponents. He's probably the 2nd most powerful striker in the UFC light heavyweight division, behind champion Alex Pereira. He's a very technically sound striker, coiled up and ready to explode with a big counterpunch. He was the faster of the 2, but he's more of a Muay Thai stylist, so it's more hand speed than footwork. He's so explosive with his striking that his counterpunch can often beat even an opponent that's committed to exiting, and that makes them hesitant to even think about their own continuation because it's the struggle just to return to safety. Khalil is good enough to overwhelm anyone in the division if Plan A works, and he can rely on his physical attributes to stay safe enough in stand-up until he can stun his opponent and take them out with a couple big shots. While his A game is good enough to beat most B-level fighters, he doesn't really have a Plan B, which is why it took him so long to reach the upper echelon, and he struggled now that he's finally started facing the division's top fighters. His cardio is an issue because he's over-muscled, but it's more that once his opponent can get him out of his comfort zone, he lacks the ability to stabilize and then change things up. Fans don't notice stand-up fighters are specialists as easily as a grappling expert like Damian Maia, who always had to struggle every round to get the fight into his domain, but Khalil has 0 takedowns in 18 UFC fights. When Khalil doing Khalil things isn't working, he's very vulnerable. I was very confident Jiri would win coming into the fight, but I didn't like what I was seeing here at all. Round 1 was just bad for him. He seemed off both physically and strategically, and it just didn't seem to be his night. I grew more confident after he started to up the pace in round 2. He found his movement and began to establish his jab and push kick, but he still wasn't committing to his strikes. Jiri is arguably the most aggressive fighter in the division, but Khalil's power commands so much respect that even Jiri avoided the pocket for the first 2 rounds. Eventually, Prochazka just had to tempt fate and rely on his incredible ability to domino his opponent as soon as the crucial first tile fell. Obviously, it helped that Khalil wasn't at full energy when he tried, but even though Jiri upped the pace in the 2nd, Rountree could easily have won the decision by continuing to stay technical, just firing back with a power punch for another round if Jiri continued to back out of harm's way. It's easy to fall into the trap of saying that Khalil just gassed, but Jiri can stress anyone but perhaps Alex, and did a great job of it here once he finally got going. Khalil is also the ideal opponent to stress because he's not going to suddenly morph into a fighter that forces his opponent to answer something dramatically different. The fact that Jiri didn't have to worry about defending takedowns at all, and clinch his leg or body strikes all that much, was a huge advantage when he was just swarming Khalil. I don't want to downplay the risk Jiri was still taking, because one big close-range punch could have put him out, but the fact that he largely just had to avoid the big counterpunch to the head did minimize his risk. I don't think Prochazka could simply have walked through Rountree in the first, because Khalil was too fast when he was fresh, but I think he could have made this a lot easier on himself if he realized he could take Khalil's best shot if he needed to sooner, and kept Khalil out of his comfort zone by forcing the inside fight earlier. Khalil did stun Jiri with an elbow on the inside, which was a key shot in the sense that it showed Rountree had something big we hadn't seen. However, the more crucial statement was made by Prochazka by surviving it and refusing to retreat, putting Khalil on notice that he was going to have to keep coming up with these kind of moments to win this fight. Khalil was already too depreciated for that. He wasn't really moving his feet anymore, and it turned out to be Khalil's last hurrah. Jiri is definitely one of the best fighters ever at consolidating once he damages the opponent. He had more trouble getting to that point than he has against any UFC opponent other than Pereira, though. Jiri has often come back, but in the past he still had his share of moments beforehand. One of the keys to this fight was that both combatants wanted to counter each other. Rountree isn't going to just walk his opponent down unless he has no respect for their power. His coiled up stance, fast twitch muscles, and explosiveness make him an incredibly dangerous counterpuncher because his hands can often beat his retreating opponent's feet to the spot. It was difficult for Prochazka to ever follow his jab because Khalil was ready and waiting, to the point that in the first half of the fight, Jiri almost always just retreated after throwing one strike, which isn't like him. Though Yuri's the longer fighter, being stuck at distance benefited Khalil because he has superior hand speed. Ideally, Jiri wants to use his constant motion to push forward and force the short-range exchanges he excels at. His average strike doesn't have nearly as much energy put into it as Khalil's does, but he makes up for it by having the widest variety of attacks in the division. He wants to counter with the strike you don't expect, and thus he's much more likely to land cleanly than Khalil is, because there's not a lot of deception to what Khalil is throwing. He's either fast enough to land it or he isn't. Prochazka was pretty out of sorts in the first round. It took him quite a while to figure out the distance, but the main issue is that he kept slipping. I thought maybe Rountree injured him with a low kick, but the more I examined things, all his issues were a lack of footing when he was on the monster logo in the center of the octagon. Obviously, it's difficult to win the position game when you wind up having to retreat from the center because you keep losing your balance. Jiri barely used any of his hand fighting and parrying because Rountree wasn't leading with his hands. Khalil would lead with a kick sometimes, but he just fought a good technical fight where he wasn't giving Prochazka many openings or much to work with. Rountree didn't really expose himself with his movement or by overextending himself. He counted on Jiri to be the one who initiated and to be able to then scare Jiri off with his counter. Since Rountree would throw one or two fast counterpunches then go back to defending, Jiri didn't want to tempt fate and push forward into what might be another big punch, so you had a situation where as long as Jiri conceded to just retreating, Khalil stopped punching and waited for Yuri's next attack. Khalil's strikes were hard and fast. They looked incredibly threatening, and that led to the unsophisticated commentators trying to excite the fans by pretending they were doing a lot more damage than they actually were. In reality, Khalil was either missing or Prochazka was rolling with his strikes well enough that he wasn't getting it flush, especially after the first round. That being said, Rountree landed all the best shots in the first round, and should have won the second round as well, given that he landed twice as many, even though the tide was definitely turning. Khalil took a spinning elbow early in the second, but he was a lot better at coming forward and putting Jiri on the defensive in the first half of round 2. He built up a nice lead, but in the second half of the round, Jiri began pushing the pace, and while he was only throwing his strikes at half power to stay safe, he was forcing Rountree to up his work rate in response. Jiri was landing the off-speed right kick now. Khalil was still more accurate though, landing hard to the body and leg. In general, Rountree did too much headhunting, especially given Jiri as a fighter with a world-class chin who was incredibly reliant on his legs. In retrospect, one could argue that Jiri started to set the table for the third round by being more active in the second, but he really wasn't committed to anything he threw or forcing sustained inside action. Khalil rocking Jiri with a big left when Jiri tried to come forward after missing his jumping knee early in the first seemed to create a long-lasting hesitation in Jiri that we've rarely seen before. Jiri just threw caution to the wind and made things happen in the third. He was a totally different fighter, creating a special brand of swarming chaos. He forced himself to believe Khalil couldn't put him down, and just hunted Khalil down. The crucial aspect was that Jiri stopped giving Khalil any breathers, and instead started taking his oxygen with front kicks, knees, and punches to the body. Alex also hurt Khalil to the body in the third round of their fight. That seems to be his kryptonite, and you could see his posture break down even before his cardio became critical. Yuri just thrives on this chaos, craziness, and insanity, and Khalil doesn't have many ways to slow even a normal fight down because he refuses to engage in any grappling, much less this sort of insanity. By his standards, Yuri looked slow in the first 2 rounds, but he just floored it in the third, moving forward with a lot more purpose. Khalil's superior technique broke down quickly under that kind of pressure, and his gas tank, which is always suspect, betrayed him due to Yuri filling the moments Khalil would normally breathe with yet another body shot. Yuri committing to relentless forward pressure finally allowed him to show how much more dynamic he is. Khalil looked really stressed, and it was also difficult to land his big power shots at short range. Rountree still had some moments because they were largely just slugging it out, but having to move backwards and expend a lot of energy trying to keep Prochazka off him had Rountree sucking wind big time. Khalil got nailed when he tried to hold his ground, especially if Yuri was able to work the clinch. Rountree's right eye was busted open badly, but Yuri going to town on Khalil's body was the crucial factor. Rountree just kind of hoped he could somehow incapacitate Yuri with a big punch, but that became more difficult as his footwork got lazy, his speed abandoned him, and his technique broke down. Yuri is the best shark at seeing blood in the water. When a weakness from his opponent becomes apparent, he really steps up his game and forces them to fight for their very existence. Yuri is great at backing a hurt opponent into the cage and then just pouring it on from every angle. That's how he won this, taking Khalil out with a left-right left-hook combo. The third round could be round of the year, but I don't think this was a great fight because only the last round was exceptional, and that only lasted 3 minutes 4 seconds. This round obviously wouldn't have been as memorable in isolation as it was after 2 rounds of Khalil negating most of what Yuri wanted to do, but round 1 was still pretty forgettable. This was a storybook comeback, a combination of Yuri's amazing desire to win and his ability to do something different to make that happen. This fight shows how much power Alex has because Yuri was able to eat Rountree's best shots and come back in the third, whereas he's yet to make it out of the second in his 2 fights with Pereira. Khalil's power is probably somewhat overrated though, because he's really only going to surprise you with his speed and explosiveness, and that's going to be a lot more effective early in the fight before his opponent gets a read on it and his endurance decreases. Yuri may lack some of Khalil's technique, and he's not going to do a whole lot on the ground either, but he has heart, durability, and stand-up diversity in spades. This fight may have been a step back for Yuri in the sense that he was never flowing. He wasn't able to show the improvements he's made in his style to set up his offense by baiting his opponent into the reaction he wants. Khalil was smart and technical, and he wasn't falling into Yuri's traps. This was just Yuri being an incredibly determined warrior who was able to will his way to yet another finish. The best fighters still find a way to win when they aren't at their best, though. This was more than Yuri surviving long enough for Khalil to slow down so he could overwhelm him late, but in the end, all that matters is he eventually did what he had to do. Very good match.